here we go. So this first part is just to show you what's happening right now. This is after I'd reassembled all the front end, and I realised that there's some work to be done as well, and I did expect to reassemble at some point, but you'll see by looking at the chrome fork seals at the front of the bike how they get covered when I take the bike off the main stand. You'll see what happens. So here we go. So I'm going to drop the bike off the stand, and you'll see if anything happens to begin with. So nothing there, but then when I push down, you can hear some binding going on there. At least they come back, but it does sound like a scraping sound, right? Okay, I push them down, and then when I lift the bike onto the stand again, you'll see how they pull back up into the full extended position, which is fine. So that's that for now, and I'll come back to you with some of the next. Okay, so the bike's lifted off the front end. That will allow me to remove the front wheel and start the disassembly process. Okay, so I've removed the axle nut, and I've removed the nuts and bolts of the brackets that fit around the fork legs that hold, well, specifically this one here on the left hand side as you're looking at it, that holds the brake plate. It's like a torque bar that's fixed to this brake plate. Okay, I'm just going to take the front wheel off now. I have to be a little bit careful, make sure I don't scratch this beautifully polished plate, the brake plate. Just going to move that around a little so it's out of the way, and tap the axle, and what you'll find now is as I pull this out from the other end, the whole wheel will drop, which it has. Pull the axle out and drop the wheel. Come on. There we go. Out the way. And I just carefully pull this wheel out of the way so it doesn't scratch anything. Alright. So that's the front wheel removed. Now I'm going to disassemble the front fender, front mudguard. Okay, so the front mudguard is now removed. I removed all the bolts from all the stays and very carefully removed the front mudguard. I don't know if you can see, but there are a couple of indents in the guard itself that fit round the fork legs for a better look. I actually had to turn the legs themselves down at the bottom in order to remove or drop the mudguard through the fork legs at the bottom. Otherwise you can't actually get the mudguard off without doing that. Here's the latest. I removed the wheel, knocked the axle out, and I realised that the axle was pretty tight in there, and that's probably contributing to some of the binding. In fact, I had to use one of these to knock the axle out. So what I've done is I've gone into this lug here, this side in particular, this one's much looser, and just cleaned that out. There was also a bit of a spiky burr of metal which I think probably was binding on the axle as well. And then I took the axle out and also give it a good polish, good clean. Used a wire wheel on the end of my drill and give it a good sort of clean up, so that this axle now goes through this fork leg and much easier. And then before I put the axle back in, I measured at latent resting the distance between here and here as well, and then I pushed the axle through my wheel and drew a little line on the axle, and you can probably just make it out. There's a line there that I did in felt tip pen that tells me that if the wheel is fitted onto the axle between the two forks and I tighten it up, it should be the correct distance. I think what was happening before is this lug here was further back, and then as I was and it wasn't pulling through as I tightened up the nut here. So that may be part of it, but there's something else. Hang on and I'll come back to you on that. Okay, so now I'm going to look at each fork leg and see how it moves up and down independently with the springs. You should note that there's no oil in the forks right now because I'm going to try that afterwards. But just to go to each leg, I grab each one and that moves up and down quite well. That's bottoming out. This one's a bit tougher. Oh, a lot tougher. Yeah, this one's... I'm just wondering if this may be part of it, because this is really stiff. Okay, so now I'm going to put some fork oil in each fork leg, and you can see with this particular model the stanchions have that screw there at the top that's used to allow you to fill up the forks with oil, and I'm using approximately 100 cc, and I'm actually using SAE 30 weight oil. I've diagnosed or run some checks in the book, and it says, you know, if you're having some problems with your forks, you might want to go to an extra weight, the next weight. Well, normally it's 20, so I'm going to go and try 30 instead. Okay, so we're making a lot more progress now. As I'd mentioned earlier, I've wire brushed my axle, actually rubbed it down a little bit with emery cloth, and also went and cleaned on the inside of here, not too aggressively. And this is what happens now when I try and put the axle in. This would have never happened before, but I've just got the fork offset just to show you, but just see, once it there runs right through now, that would have never happened before, so just it'll go in the other way as well if necessary. So feeling a lot better about the looseness now of that. So what I'll do is just twist the fork a little bit and see how that goes into the other side. So just let me twist the fork a little bit. Yeah, now that's strange. That's kind of locking a little. Oh, that's not too bad. But I'm sensing some tension between the two sides there, which might be fine, so I'm going to work on that next. Okay, so the wheel is back on, just loosely. I haven't tightened the nuts or anything like that. I have, however, pushed the axle right through, so you can see the spacer right through there now. That's looking good. The wheel seems to spin nice and smoothly, and so what I'm going to try and do now is take the bike off the stand. So just to recap, there's oil in the forks. I've taken the fender off, I've put the wheel back on, I've done the spindle work to slacken that all off, and now I'm going to take the bike off the forks to see what happens when there's weight applied on the front forks. See if they compress and then return. So now take the bike off the stand. You'll see they dropped. The forks dropped a little bit, but they dropped. I don't know if that's... So now, if I get on, it's a better sound, but you'll see they don't come back. And I don't know if that's right or wrong. I'm going to put the bike back on the stand. So the weight's off, you see, but they haven't returned. It's only when I put the stand down do you see them start coming back up again, see? Okay, so I think I'm making progress. Here's where we are right now. It's the next day. I have done a little bit of work on that front brake. Actually, it wasn't working as well as I would have liked. So I've refitted the wheel, and having worked a bit on the brake, I've just pushed the axle through again, and again it's running through really nice and lightly. And I've installed the brake cable as well, just so that I can do another test using the brake instead of trying to push down. And so just give you an idea of what the braking's looking like right now. This is me spinning the wheel. Okay, it's rubbing a little bit. Might just need a bit of work, but that's working just fine for now. Alright. What I've also done is I've also loosened off the pinch bolt again at the top of the steering column, the triple tree, and the pinch bolts, the chrome pinch bolts that go through the nacelle shrouds through the bottom triple tree have always been loose as well. So just going to try this a little bit. Oh, by the way, the bracket that goes around this right hand fork that we see right in front of us that holds onto the brake plate, that's pretty loose as well. It's just basically holding the brake plate up there for now, just so it doesn't spin round when I apply the brake. So we'll see what happens next. So we're going to remove the bike off the stand, and I'm going to try the push down test again, but this time using the brake. I also forgot to mention that I've just slightly loosened off the nuts at the top of both fork legs as well, so the cap nuts, if you like, at the top of each of the stanchions. So let's see how this goes. So everything's loose. I'm taking the bike off the main stand, and you see it dropped a little bit, actually a lot. So, oh, that does feel looser. Wow. Wow, that's definitely looser. It's riding up and down. I can feel scraping, but I think that's just... oh, the brake. That brake needs timing. But notice I'm still pulling it back. It's not that it comes back by itself. And maybe that's fine, maybe that's the way it's supposed to be. But definitely up and down. You remember when I first did this, that was like a yank down and a hefty pull back up. So, I mean, it's still a bit of a pull back, but nothing like it was. So I'm going to put it back on the stand now and assess the next step. So, there again, it pulls back, and we're back on the stand. One thing I forgot to do is what my friend Alan and his mates had suggested was try turning the fork stanchions just in case they've been bent. I have done the roll test on a flat surface and these are actually brand new old stock NOS stanchions, so I'm pretty confident that they're alright, but I'm going to try and spin those in just a minute, take the wheel off and try just turning them slightly and doing the pull up and down test on each individual leg. But just to let you know, I've refitted the nut, the screw, for the oil filler screw thread here at the top of the stanchions. Okay, got myself a cup of tea and that fixes everything, right? So I've removed the wheel. The stanchions are still in the same position right now. I'm going to just try the fork test, so moving the forks up and down individually, now that I've done all the loosening off and everything, just to see if things seems to be slackening off. You'll see I've just fixed that bracket there for the brake stay, just so it holds up and stops dropping down the bottom of the fork and scratching stuff. So also remove the brake, of course. Alright, so let's give it a whirl. This was the easy one before, and I'll just move that brake out of the way. Yeah, it's definitely a lot smoother than it was. I'd attribute that to maybe the oil, definitely. You know, it doesn't make that nasty scraping sound before. I would have thought it feels like that was internal now. That's pretty smooth. Still bottoms out if you let it go. Now then, this was the one that was a lot harder to push up and down. Yep, still is. A little bit more sort of jerky. You know, that one's smoother, this one's a bit jerkier, but it's definitely better. I do sense that it's rubbing on that shroud there, actually. Yeah. I might look at this when I start tightening this up to see if this, because these shrouds do move a bit, but it's all connected to the nacelle, which is a nightmare once you start reassembling all that. But you probably can't see right now, but they are sort of pressing back. So that's something I can probably address maybe with some spacers in here, but or as I tighten it, you know, hold it in place. But yeah, it's better. What I'm going to try and do now is turn these stanchions, if I can. Oh yeah, because I've loosened that. So I've turned that. You can't see it, but the nut that was at the front is now, I would say, a quarter turn off to the right, facing that wall over there. And now let's just try that, see if there's any. No discernible difference. I don't know. This one here, I'll maybe turn the other way. But it turns really easily. And let's try lifting it. Whoa, wow. It's certainly stiffer, this one. And I can feel it hit the inside of the shroud as I'm pushing it up. But that's because this is all loose. So I guess I'm not sensing anything different. I'm going to try another quarter turn and then another quarter turn, and then I'll come back to you, see what the results were. Okay, so I've played around with the forks quite a bit now. I turn the stanchions a quarter turn and then try pushing and pulling the forks up and down on each quarter. There really wasn't that much difference, I don't think. I've left them at one particular quarter thinking that might possibly be the most freest position of them all, but I'm just wondering if I was beginning to imagine things anyway. So I've now tightened down the nuts, the cap nuts at the top of the stanchions, and I'm going to put the wheel back on and just to see if it makes any difference again when I start bouncing.